In the sprawling city of Los Angeles, where dreams and heartbreak walk the same streets, a 12-year-old girl named Sarah Martinez clutched her worn sketchbook while watching Sylvester Stallone film a scene on Hollywood Boulevard. She wasn't just another fan seeking an autograph. She was homeless, sleeping in a car with her sick mother, and running out of options. But Sarah had something special, an extraordinary artistic talent passed down from her father, and a drawing that would change her life forever. What Sarah didn't know was that her simple sketch would reveal a connection to Stallone's past that neither of them expected. Sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest acts of courage. And on that fateful day in Hollywood, a desperate child's artwork would uncover long-buried secrets that would transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. This is more than a story about a homeless girl meeting a movie star. It's a tale about the power of art to bridge worlds, the strength of family bonds, and the unexpected ways hope finds its way home. Sarah Martinez woke up before the sun, just like she did every morning. The back seat of their old Honda Civic wasn't the most comfortable bed, but she'd gotten used to it over the past 8 months. She was careful not to wake her mother as she reached for her backpack, pulling out her school uniform that she'd carefully folded the night before. "Good morning, sweetie," her mother whispered from the front seat, her voice scratchy from sleep. Even in the dim light of dawn, Sarah could see the dark circles under her mom's eyes. "Morning, Mom. Did I wake you?" "No, mi amor. Just my cough again." As if to prove her point, Maria Martinez covered her mouth as another round of coughing shook her thin frame. Sarah's heart squeezed in her chest. Her mom's cough had gotten worse over the past few weeks, but they couldn't afford another doctor visit. Not after spending their last savings on medicine that barely helped. The early morning air was chilly as Sarah slipped out of the car, clutching her uniform and toiletry bag. Their car was parked in a quiet spot behind a strip mall on Hollywood Boulevard, hidden from view by a row of scraggly palm trees. It wasn't much, but it was safer than the shelters they'd tried at first. Sarah had her morning routine down to a science. The McDonald's on the corner opened at 5:30 a.m., and the kind-faced manager, Ms. Jenny, always pretended not to notice when Sarah used the bathroom to change and freshen up. Today, like every day, Sarah carefully washed her face and brushed her teeth, making sure her long dark hair was neat and tidy in its practical braid. "Good morning, Sarah," Ms. Jenny called out as Sarah emerged from the bathroom. "Running a little late today?" Sarah checked her watch. 5:45 a.m. Just a bit. Mom's cough kept her up again. Ms. Jenny's eyes softened with concern. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a paper bag. "Here, take these breakfast sandwiches. They were made extra by mistake." Sarah knew there were no mistakes. Ms. Jenny often made extra when she saw Sarah coming. "Thank you," she said, accepting the bag with a grateful smile. Back at the car, her mother had moved to the driver's seat, ready to drive Sarah to school before heading to the library where she spent her days applying for jobs online and trying to stay warm. "Miss Jenny says hi," Sarah said, passing her mother one of the warm sandwiches. She made extra again. Her mother's eyes welled with tears as she accepted the food. "That woman is an angel," she whispered. As they drove through the awakening streets of Los Angeles, Sarah watched the city come to life. Street vendors were setting up their carts, store owners were raising their shutters, and early morning joggers dodged around sidewalk sleepers wrapped in thin blankets. 8 months ago, Sarah wouldn't have noticed these things. 8 months ago, she'd lived in a small but cozy apartment with her mother, went to dance classes after school, and never thought twice about where she'd sleep or what she'd eat. But then her mother had lost her job at the insurance company, gotten sick, and the medical bills had piled up faster than the rejection letters from job applications. "Ready for your history test today?" her mother asked, pulling up a block away from Sarah's school. They always stopped here. Sarah didn't want anyone to see their car home. "I think so. I studied at the library yesterday." Sarah gathered her backpack, checking that her homework was still neatly tucked into her folders. Being homeless didn't mean she had to let her grades slip. If anything, she studied harder now, knowing education was her best chance at a better future. "That's my girl." Her mother reached over to squeeze her hand. "I'm so proud of you, Sarah. Your father would be too." Sarah's throat tightened at the mention of her dad. He'd passed away 3 years ago, but sometimes it felt like yesterday. He was the one who'd taught her to draw, spending hours showing her how to capture light and shadow, how to make lines flow like music on paper. Now his old sketchbook was one of her most precious possessions, carefully wrapped in plastic and hidden under the car's spare tire to keep it safe. "I love you, Mom," Sarah said, giving her mother a quick hug before stepping out into the morning sunshine. "Te amo, mi vida. Have a good day at school." Sarah waited until the car disappeared around the corner before walking toward Hamilton Middle. School! Her uniform was clean and pressed. She'd hand-washed it in the library bathroom yesterday. And her homework was complete. No one would guess that she'd spent the night sleeping in a car. As she walked through the school gates, Sarah overheard Madison Chen talking about her upcoming birthday party. "It's going to be a jump world, and everyone's invited," Madison was saying to a group of excited girls. She caught Sarah's eye. "You'll come, won't you, Sarah? You never come to any parties anymore." Sarah forced a smile. "Thanks, Madison. I'll have to check with my mom." The truth was, she couldn't afford a birthday gift, and the thought of explaining why she couldn't get a ride to the party was too much to bear. The morning passed in a blur of classes. Sarah aced her history test, helped Jenny Chen, Madison's cousin, understand their math homework, and managed to avoid any questions about why she always wore the same 2 sets of uniform clothes. At lunch, she sat with her best friend Lily, sharing the second breakfast sandwich Ms. Jenny had given her that morning. "You sure you don't want the whole thing?" Lily asked, even as she accepted half the sandwich. "You seem extra hungry lately." "I had a big breakfast," Sarah lied, ignoring the hollow feeling in her stomach. She'd learned to ignore a lot of things lately. After school, Sarah walked back to Hollywood Boulevard. She was supposed to meet her mother at the library, but she had an hour to spare. Finding a quiet spot near the Chinese theater, she pulled out her father's old sketchbook and a pencil worn down to a stub. Drawing was her escape. When the pencil was in her hand, she wasn't a homeless girl worried about her sick mother. She was an artist, just like her dad had been. She could create whole worlds on paper, worlds where they had a home and enough food, and her mother was healthy again. Today, she found herself drawing the faces of people passing by. Tourists posing with street performers, locals hurrying past, with shopping bags and a film crew setting up equipment near the Walk of Fame. Sarah's hand moved quickly across the paper, capturing expressions and moments in quick, sure strokes. Then she saw him, Sylvester Stallone, walking toward the film crew with his distinctive stride. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she remembered watching Rocky movies with her father, how he'd point out the artistry in the way scenes were shot, the way light and shadow played across faces to tell a story. Without thinking, her pencil began, moving across a fresh page, capturing the actor's familiar features. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of her father, a kind of determination, a fighter's spirit. A cool breeze rustled the pages of her sketchbook, carrying with it the scent of hot dogs from a nearby vendor. Sarah's stomach growled, reminding her it was time to meet her mother at the library. As she packed up her supplies, she took one last look at her drawing of Stallone. Maybe tomorrow she'd show it to him. Maybe tomorrow would be the day things changed. But for now, she had to focus on surviving another night, on keeping her grades up, on being strong for her mother. Sarah squared her shoulders and headed toward the library, clutching her father's sketchbook close to her heart, unaware that tomorrow would indeed change everything, just not in any way she could have imagined. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but Sarah's mother couldn't stop coughing. Each rough, rattling sound made Sarah's stomach twist with worry. "Maybe we should skip school today," Sarah suggested, watching her mother struggle to catch her breath. "I could stay with you?" "Absolutely not." Her mother's voice was firm, despite being barely more than a whisper. "Education comes first, always. Your father and I agreed on that before you were even born." Sarah bit her lip, remembering how her dad used to say that knowledge was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you. He'd worked 2 jobs to put himself through art school, and even though he'd had to leave the film industry to care for his parents, he'd never stopped learning or creating. "At least let me walk to school today," Sarah said. "You should rest." Her mother started to protest, but another coughing fit cut her words short. Finally, she nodded. Straight to school, Mija. No detours. But Sarah had already made up her mind about what she needed to do. After changing at McDonald's, where Miss Jenny pressed 2 sandwiches into her hands with a worried look, Sarah headed not toward school, but back to Hollywood Boulevard. The film crew from yesterday was setting up again, their trucks and equipment taking up half the block. Sarah found a spot behind a newspaper stand where she could watch without being noticed. She pulled out her sketchbook and began to draw, not the scene in front of her, but something from memory, the way Stallone had looked yesterday, that familiar determination in his eyes. As she drew, she remembered watching Rocky with her father on their old couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn while he pointed out his favorite scenes. "See how they filmed that, Majita?" he'd say, eyes shining. "The way the light hits his face when he's down, but then watch. It changes when he starts to get back up. That's storytelling through art." Sarah had been too young then to understand what he meant, but now, as her pencil moved across the paper, she thought she finally got it. Art wasn't just about copying what you saw, it was about capturing the feeling, the story behind the image. For 2 hours, she watched Stallone film the same scene over and over. She noticed how he always took time between takes to talk to Saad, the crew, especially the ones doing the harder physical jobs. Once, she saw him pull out his wallet and give what looked like a $100 bill to a street musician who'd been playing guitar nearby. That's when Sarah began to form her plan. She looked down at her drawing. It was one of her best. She'd captured not just Stallone's features, but that fighter's spirit she recognized from her father. Taking a deep breath, she tore the page carefully from her sketchbook. But before she could gather her courage to approach him, a commotion near the crew's coffee station caught everyone's attention. A group of tourists had broken through the security line, asking for autographs and selfies. Sarah watched as Stallone's security team quickly moved in, forming a barrier between him and the crowd. "No autographs during filming," one of the guards announced firmly. "Mr. Stallone will be happy to meet fans after we wrap for the day." Sarah's heart sank. She looked at her watch. She was already late for school. Her mother would be worried sick if the school called about her absence. With a heavy sigh, she carefully tucked the drawing back into her sketchbook. Maybe it had been a silly idea anyway. Why would someone like Sylvester Stallone care about her drawing? He probably had people giving him things all day long. But as she stood to leave, she heard her father's voice in her head, as clear as if he were standing next to her. "Remember what Rocky says, Majita. It's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. Sarah sat back down and pulled out her drawing again. She watched the film crew work through lunch, noticed how Stallone always went to the same chair between takes, always took the same path to and from his trailer. She spent the afternoon adding details to her sketch, making it perfect. Every shadow, every line had to tell the story she wanted to share. As she worked, she thought about her mother's worsening cough, about the way her clothes hung looser on her frame every week. She thought about the college fund they'd had to empty to pay for doctor's visits, about the dreams her parents had for her that seemed to be slipping further away each day. By late afternoon, Sarah's fingers were smudged with graphite, and her stomach was growling. She'd given her second sandwich to a homeless man who reminded her of her grandfather. But her drawing was finished, and it was better than anything she'd ever done before. She watched as the crew began packing up for the day. This was her chance. Standing on shaky legs, Sarah clutched her drawing and took one step forward. Then another, and another. She was halfway to Stallone's chair when a security guard spotted her. "Hey, kid, this is a closed set." Sarah's throat went dry, but she kept walking. She could see Stallone now, talking to someone who looked like the director. "I said stop!" The guard moved to intercept her. Sarah did the only thing she could think of. She held up her drawing like a shield and called out, "Mr. Stallone, please, I just want to show you something." Several heads turned her way. The guard's hand was on her shoulder now, ready to escort her away. But then Stallone himself looked up, and for a moment, just a moment, their eyes met. In that brief connection, Sarah saw something that made her heart skip. The same look her father used to get when he saw one of her drawings. That artist's eye, searching for the story behind the image. The guard was turning her around now, his grip gentle but firm. "Come on, kid. Time to go." But Sarah heard footsteps behind her, and then a familiar voice, one she'd heard in dozens of movies watched with her father, said, "Wait, let me see what she's got." The guard's hand dropped away. Sarah turned slowly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She held out her drawing with trembling fingers, knowing that everything, her mother's, health, their future, all their hopes, might depend on what happened in the next few moments. Sylvester Stallone reached for the paper, and as he took it from her hands, Sarah sent up a silent prayer to her father. "Help him see what you taught me to see. Help him understand." The sun was setting over Hollywood Boulevard, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As Sarah held her breath and waited to see if her desperate chance would pay off, time seemed to freeze as Sylvester Stallone studied Sarah's drawing. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears, feel the evening breeze catching at her worn school uniform. The security guard stood nearby, watching carefully but no longer trying to remove her. Stallone's expression changed as he looked at the sketch. Surprise, then something deeper. His eyes moved from the drawing to Sarah's face, then back to the drawing again. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd expected. "You did this today? While watching us film?" Sarah shook her head. "Last night and today, but mostly from memory." She swallowed hard. "My dad and I used to watch all your movies together. Rocky was his favorite." Something in Stallone's expression softened at the word "was." He gestured to a nearby equipment case. "Sit down for a minute, kid. What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Martinez." She perched nervously on the edge of the case, very aware of how many people were watching them now. Stallone pulled his chair closer, still holding her drawing. "This is really something special, Sarah. Most people who draw me, they focus on the obvious things, the muscles, the tough guy look. But you, he tapped the paper. You caught something else, something in the eyes. Sarah's own eyes stung with sudden tears. That's exactly what her father used to say about her drawings, that she saw past the surface to what was underneath. "Tell me about your dad," Stallone said, and there was genuine interest in his voice. "He taught you to draw?" Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "He was an artist too. He always said that art was about finding the truth in things, not just copying. What you see. Smart man." Stallone was looking at her more carefully now, taking in details she wished he wouldn't notice. Her slightly too small uniform, the worn spots on her shoes, the way her collar couldn't quite hide how thin she'd gotten. "Where is he now?" "He passed away 3 years ago." Sarah's voice wavered but didn't break. "Cancer?" Stallone was quiet for a moment, still studying her face. Then he asked, "When's the last time you ate, Sarah?" The question caught her off guard. She thought about lying, but something in his eyes, that same something she'd tried to capture in her drawing, made her tell the truth. "I had half a sandwich this morning. I gave the other half to—" She stopped, not wanting to admit she'd given it away. To someone who needed it more? Stallone finished for her. When she nodded, he smiled. Not his famous movie star smile, but something gentler. "Yeah, I thought so. There's a look people get when they're used to putting others first. I see it in your drawing, and I see it in you." He waved to someone behind Sarah, and a moment later, a production assistant hurried over with a box of food from the crew's catering table. Stallone handed it to her. "Eat, then we'll talk more." Sarah wanted to refuse. Her mother had taught her never to take handouts, but the smell of warm food made her dizzy with hunger. As she ate, Stallone continued to study her drawing. "There's something familiar about your style," he said thoughtfully. "Something in the way you handle light and shadow. Reminds me of—" He trailed off, frowning slightly. "What did you say your dad's name was?" Before Sarah could answer, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. Her mother was hurrying toward them, looking terrified. "Sarah! Dios mío, where have you been? The school called." She stopped short when she saw who Sarah was sitting with. "Mom, I can explain." But her mother's next words weren't what Sarah expected. "Oh my God," Maria Martinez whispered, staring at Stallone. "You look exactly the same." Stallone stood up slowly, his expression changing to one of dawning recognition. "Maria? Maria Vasquez?" He used her maiden name, the one she'd had before, marrying Sarah's father. Sarah looked between them in confusion. "Mom? You know him?" Her mother's hand trembled as she pressed it to her mouth, only to be interrupted by another coughing fit. Stallone quickly guided her to sit where Sarah had been. "Your mother used to work in the production office on Rocky III," he explained to Sarah. "But that means—" His eyes widened. "Carlos? Carlos Martinez was your father?" Sarah nodded, stunned. "You knew my dad?" "Knew him?" Stallone shook his head in amazement. "Kid, your father was one of the most talented set painters I ever worked with. He did all the backdrops for the training sequences, painted that amazing mural in the gym scene." He looked back at the drawing in his hands. "No wonder your style seemed familiar. Carlos had this way of capturing motion in stillness, making every shadow tell a story." Sarah's mother was crying now, quiet tears rolling down her cheeks. "He never told her," she said softly. "After his parents got sick and he had to leave the industry, He said it hurt too much to talk about those days. He just focused on teaching Sarah what he knew about art. Stallone knelt down beside Maria's chair, his face concerned. "You're sick?" he said. It wasn't a question, just a bad cough. Maria tried to wave it off, but another fit of coughing betrayed her. "Mom has pneumonia," Sarah said, her voice small. "But we can't. I mean, the insurance..." She didn't need to finish. Stallone was already pulling out his phone. "Jerry," he said when someone answered. "Remember that doctor who helped with my mom? Yeah, the specialist. I need a favor." He looked at Maria. "Right now." "We couldn't possibly," Maria began, but Stallone cut her off. "Carlos Martinez saved my butt more times than I can count," he said firmly. "Stayed up all night repainting sets when things went wrong, never complained, always had a smile and a joke ready. He was part of our film family." He turned to Sarah. "And now his daughter shows up with his talent and his heart, still fighting just like he taught her." He smiled, that gentle smile again. The universe doesn't hand out coincidences like this for no reason. A sleek black car was already pulling up to the curb. The security guard who'd tried to stop Sarah earlier was now helping Maria stand up, supporting her as she coughed. "But our car," Sarah protested weakly, thinking of their home on wheels parked behind the strip mall. "All our things." "Give the keys to Tommy here," Stallone gestured to the guard. "He'll make sure everything gets moved to where you'll be staying tonight." "Where we'll be?" Sarah's head was spinning. "I've got a friend who owns a small hotel nearby. Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. You'll stay there while we get your mom proper treatment." He put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "And then we'll figure out the rest. Together." As they walked toward the waiting car, Stallone still holding her drawing carefully, Sarah felt like she was in a dream. But then she heard her father's voice in her head again. "Sometimes life hits you harder than any boxer could. But sometimes, Vegeta, it surprises you with a gift instead of a punch. The trick is being brave enough to stay in the ring long enough to find out which it's going to be." The sun had fully set now, and the lights of Hollywood Boulevard were coming on one by one, each one twinkling like a star, like a promise, like hope. Sarah felt her mother's arm around her shoulders as they slid into the car's cool interior. She thought about her father's sketchbook, safely hidden under the spare tire, waiting to come home. She thought about all the drawings yet to be drawn, all the stories yet to be told. As the car pulled away from the curb, Stallone looked at Sarah's. "Drawing one more time. You know," he said thoughtfully, "we're shooting a scene tomorrow that could really use an artist's eye. Someone who knows how to capture the truth of things, not just what's on the surface. Interested in giving me some advice?" Sarah smiled, through her tears, feeling her father's artist spirit burning bright inside her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'd like that very much." But even as joy filled her heart, she couldn't help wondering what other secrets about her father's past were still waiting to be discovered? What other pieces of his life's puzzle would help complete the picture of who he really was? The answer to that question would have to wait for tomorrow. For now, Sarah held her mother's hand and watched the city lights blur past the window, each one a beacon guiding them toward their new beginning. The hotel room wasn't big, but to Sarah, it felt like a palace. 2 clean beds with fluffy pillows, a bathroom with hot water that didn't shut off after 2 minutes, even a small desk by the window where she could draw. Her mother had fallen asleep as soon as the doctor finished examining her. "Severe pneumonia," he'd said, writing prescriptions and arranging for follow-up care. But we caught it in time. Now Maria Martinez slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, her breathing easier thanks to the medicine flowing through the nebulizer by her bed. Sarah sat at the desk, her father's old sketchbook open in front of her. Tommy, the security guard, had brought it along with their other belongings from the car. She turned the pages slowly, seeing her father's artwork with new eyes. A memory surfaced, clear as yesterday. She was 7 years old, watching her father draw in this very sketchbook. His strong hands moved the pencil with sure, confident strokes, creating a world on paper. "Poppy," she'd asked, "why don't you draw? At work anymore? Ms. Rodriguez's daddy draws buildings because he's an architect, but you just paint houses." Her father had gone very still, the pencil hovering above the paper. Then he'd pulled her into his lap. "Mijita," he'd said softly, "sometimes life makes you choose between what you love and who you love." "I don't understand," 7-year-old Sarah had pouted. "Before you were born, I used to paint beautiful things for movies. Big paintings, tall as the sky." His eyes had gotten that far-away look they sometimes did. "But then my parents, your abuelitos, got very sick. They needed me to take care of them. The movie work, it kept me away too much. Sometimes for weeks. I couldn't do that to them." "But you still paint our house," Sarah had said, trying to cheer him up. He'd laughed then, hugging her close. "Yes, I paint houses now. It's honest work. It lets me be there for my family." And he'd tapped her nose with his pencil, leaving a smudge of graphite. "It gives me time to teach my talented daughter everything I know about art." The memory faded as Sarah heard a knock at the hotel room door. She opened it to find Sylvester Stallone holding a large paper bag. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, stepping inside quietly, when she gestured to her sleeping mother. "How's she doing?" "Better," Sarah whispered. "The doctor said the medicine should start working soon." They sat at the small table by the window where Stallone unpacked containers of pasta, salad, and warm bread. As Sarah ate, trying not to seem too hungry, he picked up her father's sketchbook from the desk. "May I?" Sarah nodded, her mouth full of the best spaghetti she'd ever tasted. Stallone turned the pages carefully, respect evident in every movement. "Carlos used to do quick sketches between takes," he said softly. Said it helped him understand how the light needed to fall in his backdrop paintings. He stopped at a page showing a boxing ring from above. "I remember when he did this one. We were having trouble with the lighting in the final fight scene. Carlos stayed up all night working on the backdrop, adjusting the painted shadows until they matched perfectly with the real ones. He never told me any of this," Sarah said, her voice small. "Why wouldn't he tell me?" Stallone was quiet for a moment, still looking at the sketch. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "when people have to give up something they love, even for the best reasons, talking about it hurts too much. But Carlos found a way to keep his art alive. Through you." He turned to a newer page in the sketchbook, one showing Sarah's early attempts at drawing faces. Her father's notes filled the margins. "Remember to look for the spirit in the eyes," and "light tells the story as much as shadow does." "These are the same things he used to tell our lighting crew," Stallone said, smiling. "He was teaching you everything he knew, in his own way." From the bed came a soft sound. Sarah's mother was awake, watching them with tears in her eyes. "Maria," Stallone said gently, "I've been meaning to ask, that mural Carlos painted for Rocky III, the one in the gym scene, what happened to it?" Maria Martinez sat up slowly, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "He kept it? After filming Wrapped, you told him to take it home." Said it was his best work and belonged with him. She pointed to her purse. Sarah, bring me the blue folder. Sarah found the folder tucked carefully between her mother's few remaining. Precious documents. Inside was a photograph she'd never seen before. Her father, younger and smiling broadly, standing in front of a massive painting of a boxer in mid-punch, the backdrop somehow capturing both motion and emotion in frozen time. It's in storage, Maria said. When things got bad, I couldn't sell it. Couldn't even tell Sarah about it. It was Carlos's masterpiece. Mom? Sarah's voice shook. Why didn't you tell me? Because, Maria whispered, he made me promise. He said, when the time was right, when you were ready, the art would find its way back to you. She looked at Stallone. I never imagined it would happen like this. Stallone stood up, decision clear in his face. Tomorrow, he said, after we get Maria's follow-up treatment sorted out, we're going to that storage unit. That painting belongs in the world being seen, and I think I know exactly where it should go. Sarah looked at the photograph again, seeing her father's proud smile, the passion in his eyes as he stood before his creation. She thought about all the times he'd encouraged her art, never once hinting at his own past success. How he'd poured everything he knew into teaching her, preparing her for a moment he wouldn't be around to see. He never gave up art at all, did he? She asked her mother. He just found a different way to keep it alive. No, mi amor, her mother answered softly. He found the most important way of all. Outside the hotel window, the Hollywood sign glowed. In the distance, its lights steady and bright against the dark hills. Sarah thought about how many dreams those letters had witnessed. Some lost, some found, some transformed into something entirely new and unexpected. Her father had chosen family over fame, love over recognition. But somehow, through twists of fate and a simple pencil drawing, his art had found its way back into the light. And tomorrow, she would learn even more about the man who had taught her to see the world through an artist's eyes. But for now, surrounded by her mother's love and her father's legacy, Sarah felt truly at home for the first time in months. Sarah woke early the next morning, sunlight streaming through real curtains instead of car windows. For a moment, she was confused by the softness of the bed, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Then she remembered everything that had happened yesterday, and her heart did a little flip of joy. Her mother was still sleeping peacefully, her breathing much easier than it had been in weeks. The new medicines were already working their magic. Sarah got ready for school as quietly as she could, putting on her freshly washed uniform that Tommy had picked up from the dry cleaners last night. A knock at the door revealed Stallone's driver, ready to take her to school. Mr. Stallone said to tell you he'll pick you up himself after school, the driver said. Something about a storage unit and a surprise. Sarah's stomach bubbled with excitement all the way to Hamilton Middle School. For the first time in months, she didn't have to be dropped off a block away to hide their situation. Instead, the sleek black car pulled right up to the school entrance. Sarah Martinez! Ms. Thompson, her art teacher, called out as Sarah walked into first period. Where were you yesterday? We missed you in class. Sarah opened her mouth, not sure what to say, when another voice spoke up from the doorway. That would be my fault. Sylvester Stallone stood there, looking slightly out of place in the middle school hallway. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to talk to you about Sarah's artistic talent, if you have a moment. The classroom erupted in whispers. Ms. Thompson's eyes went wide, but she quickly composed herself. Class, please work on your perspective drawings. Sarah, we'll talk in the hall. In the hallway, Stallone explained everything, well, almost everything, to Ms. Thompson. He told her about Sarah's drawing, about discovering her father's connection to his movies, about wanting to nurture her talent. What he didn't mention was their homelessness or her mother's illness, and Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for his discretion. "I'm not surprised," Ms. Thompson said, beaming at Sarah. "She's one of my most gifted students. Did you know she's been helping other students with their art?" Stallone raised an eyebrow at Sarah. "No, I didn't," Ms. Thompson nodded enthusiastically. "Just last week, she spent her entire lunch period helping Tommy Chen with his self-portrait project." The boy was in tears because he couldn't get the proportions right. "But Sarah," she smiled proudly. Sarah had this wonderful way of explaining it, using the shapes of everyday objects to help him understand. "Just like my dad taught me," Sarah said softly. "He said everyone can learn to draw if they learn to really see things first." "That reminds me," Ms. Thompson said, reaching into her classroom. She returned with a folder. "I've been saving these for our school art show next month." She pulled out several drawings, all done by Sarah over the past few months. There were portraits of her classmates, sketches of the school buildings, and one particular piece that made Stallone lean in closer. It was a drawing of the school cafeteria, but Sarah had captured more than just tables and chairs. She'd shown the stories happening at each table. A girl sharing her lunch with a friend who had none, a boy teaching another boy how to solve a math problem, a group of kids making room at their table for someone sitting alone. "This is remarkable," Stallone said quietly. "The composition, the detail, but more than that." He looked at Sarah. "You see people's kindness, don't you? Just like your father did." Ms. Thompson looked confused. "Her father?" "Carlos Martinez," Stallone explained. "He was a talented artist who worked in the film industry. Sarah inherited his gift for seeing beyond the surface." Recognition flickered in Ms. Thompson's eyes. "Carlos Martinez? Wait." She hurried back into her classroom and returned with an old art magazine. "I knew I remembered that name. Look at this." The magazine was from 20 years ago. Inside was an article about up-and-coming artists in Hollywood, with a small feature on Carlos Martinez. There was a photo of him working on a massive backdrop, his face young and focused. "I used this magazine in my college thesis about film art," Ms. Thompson said excitedly. The article talked about his unique technique for capturing movement in static images. "I had no idea he was your father, Sarah." Sarah stared at the magazine, drinking in this new glimpse of her father's life. The article praised his innovative use of light and shadow, his ability to make painted backgrounds seem alive with motion. "He never told me about any of this," she whispered. "But he taught you everything he knew," Stallone said gently. "Every time he showed you how to hold a pencil, how to look for the heart of what you were drawing, he was passing on his legacy." The bell rang, making them all jump. "I should get to class," Sarah said reluctantly. "Of course." Stallone handed her a small card. "This is my private number. Call if you need anything. I'll pick you up after school. We've got a painting to find." As Sarah headed to her next class, she heard snippets of excited conversation. "Was that really Sylvester Stallone? Did you see him talking to Sarah? I didn't know she was such an amazing artist." But Sarah barely noticed. Her mind was on the storage unit waiting to be opened, the mysteries of her father's past waiting to be revealed. She thought about all. The drawings she'd done over the months of homelessness, quick sketches sold to tourists for food money, portraits drawn for other homeless people to send to their families, even the little cartoons she'd draw to make her mother smile on their hardest days. She hadn't known it then, But she'd been following in her father's footsteps all along, using art not just to create beauty, but to help others, to tell stories that needed to be told. In math class, Sarah found herself drawing in the margins of her notebook. Not her usual doodles, but light studies, the way her father had done. She thought about his choice to leave the film industry to care for his parents, how it must have hurt to walk away from his dreams. But had he really walked away? Or had he just found a different canvas, a different way to share his gift? The day seemed to crawl by, each minute stretching like honey in winter. Sarah aced her history test, helped Jenny Chen with her math homework, again, and for the first time in months, ate a full lunch in the cafeteria instead of hiding in the library. But through it all, her mind kept returning to that storage unit. What would they find there? What other pieces of her father's life were waiting to be discovered? When the final bell rang, Sarah rushed to her locker, her heart pounding with anticipation. Through the school's front windows, she could see Stallone waiting by his car, her mother sitting in the front seat looking stronger already. As she hurried toward them, Sarah felt like she was walking into one of her own drawings, a scene full of promise and possibility where every shadow held a story waiting to be told, and every ray of light pointed toward home. The storage facility was on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a maze of identical orange doors baking in the afternoon sun. Sarah sat in the back of Stallone's air-conditioned car, clutching her father's sketchbook as they wound their way through the numbered rows. "Unit 227, her mother said softly. "We haven't been here in 8 months? Not since we had to—" She trailed off, but Sarah knew what she meant. Not since they'd had to sell most of their furniture to pay for doctor visits and medicine. They pulled up in front of a door that looked just like all the others. But to Sarah, it felt different. Special. Behind this door lay pieces of her father's past, waiting to be rediscovered. Tommy, who had followed in another car, stepped forward with bolt cutters. The lock was rusted from months of neglect. They'd had to stop paying for the unit after the 3rd month of homelessness. "Wait," Sarah said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Before we open it, Mom, are you sure you're strong enough? Maybe we should wait until—" Her mother took her hand. "Mi amor, I've been waiting months to show you this. The new medicine is working. I feel stronger already." She smiled. Besides, some things can't wait any longer. The lock fell away with a clang. Tommy and Stallone gripped the rolling door together and pulled it up. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that flooded the unit. Sarah blinked, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness beyond. She could make out shapes covered in sheets, stacked boxes, the remnants of their old life carefully preserved. "There," her mother pointed to something large propped against the back wall. Behind those boxes, working together, Tommy and Stallone carefully moved the boxes aside. Sarah's heart beat faster as they gripped the edges of a massive canvas wrapped in protective plastic. "Careful," Stallone advised. "This is museum-quality work." They carried it out into the sunlight, laying it gently on sawhorses Tommy had brought. Sarah held her breath as Stallone began cutting away the plastic wrapping. The painting emerged slowly, like a butterfly from a chrysalis. First, the edges, deep blues and purples swirling with golden light. Then, the central image appeared, and Sarah gasped. It wasn't just a boxing scene, as she'd expected from the old photograph. It was something more. The boxer in the painting was both falling and rising at the same time, his body caught in that perfect moment between defeat and triumph. Around him, the crowd was a blur of motion and color, but their faces were crystal clear. each one showing a different emotion, telling a different story. And the light. Sarah had never seen anything like it. The painted light seemed to move across the canvas, changing the scene as you looked at it from different angles. "Your father's masterpiece," Stallone said quietly. He painted this after watching the final fight scene in Rocky III over and over. Said he wanted to capture not just what victory looked like, but what it felt like. Sarah stepped closer, noticing details she hadn't seen at first. In the crowd, there was a small figure, a man holding a little girl on his shoulders, both of them cheering. The man's face was unmistakably her father's. "That's you," her mother said, touching the painted child gently. "You were only 2 when he painted this. He put you in there as his good luck charm." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks as she studied every inch of the massive painting. She could see all the things her father had taught her about art, the importance of shadow and light, the way motion could be frozen but still feel alive, how every face told its own story. "This belongs in a museum," Stallone said firmly. "Or, better yet," he paused, thinking, "the new youth center we're building downtown, the one with the art program for kids. This should be the centerpiece, inspiration for young artists, just like Sarah." "Really?" Sarah looked up at him. "You'd do that?" "With your permission," he nodded. "We'll put up a plaque telling your father's story. His art will keep teaching, keep inspiring." He smiled, "Just like he did with you." But Sarah had noticed something else, a smaller canvas wrapped in the same plastic. "What's that one?" Her mother's eyes welled up. That was his last painting, the one he was working on when she couldn't finish. Together, they unwrapped it. This painting was different, softer, more intimate. It showed a young girl, Sarah recognized herself at 9 years old, sitting at a desk, drawing. Behind her stood a shadowy figure with one hand on her shoulder, guiding her pencil. The figure was transparent, like a ghost or a memory, but its face was full of love. "He knew," her mother whispered. "He knew he wouldn't be there to teach you everything." This was his way of saying he'd always be with you, guiding your hand. Sarah touched the painted version of her father's hand, remembering how it had felt when he'd taught her to draw. She could almost hear his voice. "Art isn't just about what you see, Majita. It's about what you feel, what you know in your heart to be true." Stallone cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know," he said. "I made some calls this morning. The youth center needs an art teacher, someone who understands both technique and heart. Maria, once you're stronger, the job is yours if you want it." Sarah's mother gasped. "But I'm not an artist." "No," Stallone agreed. "But you know how to nurture talent. You kept Carlos's art alive through Sarah. And there are other kids out there who need someone to believe in. Their dreams." He gestured to the paintings. "These will hang in your classroom. Carlos will keep teaching through them. Through you. Through Sarah." Sarah looked at her mother, saw the spark of hope in her eyes that had been missing for so long. They weren't just getting a fresh start. They were getting a chance to share their blessings, to help others the way they'd been helped. But as Sarah studied her father's paintings in the golden afternoon light, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to discover. What other stories were hidden in his art? What other messages had he left for her to find? The answer would come soon enough, though not in any way she could have expected. The discovery came 3 days later, while Sarah's mother was getting her follow-up treatment at the doctor's office. Sarah had stayed behind at the youth center, helping to prepare the space where her father's masterpiece would hang. She was carefully cleaning the massive canvas when Stallone's art restoration expert noticed something unusual. "Hold on," Ms. Chen, who happened to be Madison and Jenny's aunt, said, leaning close to the painting's corner. "There's something written here, under the varnish." Sarah peered where Ms. Chen was pointing. At first, she saw nothing but the deep blues of the shadowy corner. Then, as the light hit it just right, she saw it too. Tiny words, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "It's like a secret message," Ms. Chen said excitedly. "Artists sometimes hide signatures or messages in their work, but this..." She carefully photographed the corner with her special light. "This is something more." When she enhanced the photo on her tablet, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. There, in her father's familiar handwriting, was a message. For Sarah. "The real masterpiece is in the light. Studio 37, Paramount Archives. Love, Dad." Studio 37? Sarah looked at Stallone, who had been supervising the restoration. "What's that?" Stallone's eyes widened with recognition. "The old painting storage facility at Paramount. That's where Carlos worked between filming, touching up backdrops, creating new ones." He pulled out his phone. "Give me an hour to make some calls." That hour felt like a year to Sarah. She tried to focus on helping Ms. Chen clean the painting, but her mind kept racing. What had her father hidden? Why hadn't he told her about it directly? Finally, Stallone returned, keys in hand. "They're letting us in. Tommy will stay here with the painting. Ms. Chen knows what she's doing." The drive to Paramount Studios felt surreal. Sarah had passed these famous gates countless times on the bus, never imagining she'd go inside. But today, she watched them swing open like the entrance to a secret world. Studio 37 turned out to be a long, low building near the back of the lot. Inside, row after row of massive paintings stood in climate-controlled racks, backdrops from decades of movie magic. Carlos worked here for years, Stallone explained, as they followed a studio archivist through the maze of artwork. He could make a painted scene look more real than reality. "Here we are," the archivist said, stopping at a section marked Rocky III, 1982. "This is where we stored all the unused backdrops." They began carefully pulling out paintings, examining each one. Sarah was amazed by her father's work. Each backdrop was a masterpiece of light and shadow, bringing movie scenes to life. Then they found it. At first glance, it looked like a simple painting of the boxing ring from Rocky III, lit dramatically from above. But something about the light made Sarah step closer. "Wait," she whispered. "Look at this." When viewed straight on, the painting showed the empty ring. But when you moved to the left, the light in the painting seemed to shift, revealing a ghostly image. A young Carlos Martinez, painting at an easel, moved to the right, and another image appeared. The same scene Sarah's mother had photographed, of him standing proudly by his finished work. "It's impossible," the archivist breathed. "How did he do this?" "Special paint," Stallone said softly. "I remember now. Carlos was experimenting with some new technique. Paint that would reveal different images when viewed from different angles. He called it memory paint, because it could hold multiple moments in time. But look," Sarah pointed to the center of the ring. When they all stood at just the right angle, a third image appeared. A detailed sketch of Sarah as a baby, sleeping in her father's arms while he worked. "There's something else," the archivist said, pointing to a small metal box attached to the back of the canvas. "This isn't part of our storage system." With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the box. Inside was a letter, carefully preserved in plastic, and a small notebook. "Mi querida Sarah," she read aloud, tears blurring her vision. "If you're reading this, you've discovered my secret. The special paint I developed, it was never about special effects for movies. It was about leaving something for you, a way to show you that every moment in life has many angles, many truths." The notebook turned out to be her father's formula book, containing not just the secret of his special paint, but pages of notes about art and life, all addressed to her. "I had to leave the movies to care for my parents," one entry read, "but I never left art behind. Instead, I learned the most important lesson, that art isn't about fame or money. It's about love, about seeing the beauty in ordinary moments and sharing it with others. This paint formula is my gift to you, mi amor. Use it to show the world that every story has many layers, just waiting to be discovered in the right light." Stallone cleared his throat. "You know what this means, Sarah? Your father didn't just create beautiful paintings, he invented a whole new way of making art. This technique, it could revolutionize how we tell stories through paintings. But he never tried to sell it," Sarah realized. "He was saving it. For me." The archivist was already making calls, talking excitedly about patents and art historians. But Sarah barely heard him. She was reading her father's last note, written just weeks before he got sick. "Sarah, my greatest masterpiece isn't any painting. It's the love of art I see in your eyes when you draw. The way you find beauty in simple things. How you use your talent to help others. I may not be there to teach you everything, but I've hidden clues for you to find when you're ready. Each discovery will remind you that you're never alone. That every stroke of your pencil carries the love and dreams of generations." Standing there in the studio where her father had once worked, surrounded by his art and his words, Sarah finally understood. He hadn't just left her a fortune in the form of a revolutionary painting technique. He'd left her a map to find herself, clues that could only be discovered when she was ready to see them. But even as she clutched the precious notebook to her chest, Sarah sensed that there was one final secret waiting to be revealed. One last message from her father that would change everything she thought she knew about his life, his art, and her own destiny. The biggest revelation of all was just around the corner, though it would come from the most unexpected source imaginable. Though Youth Center was packed for its grand opening, Sarah stood with her mother, healthy now and glowing with pride, in front of her father's restored masterpiece. The special lighting they'd installed revealed all the hidden images at different times, drawing gasps of wonder from the crowd. But it wasn't just the painting that had people talking. Word had spread about Carlos Martinez's revolutionary memory paint technique. Art historians and museum curators filled the room, all eager to see the work of the quiet genius who had kept his invention secret for his daughter. "And now," Stallone announced from the small podium, "I'd like to introduce someone very special, someone who knew Carlos Martinez long before he worked on Rocky III." Sarah turned, curious. She thought she knew all her father's old friends by now. But the elderly man making his way to the front of the room was a stranger to her. "This is Arthur Fleming," Stallone said. He was the head of art restoration at the Metropolitan Museum of Art 40 years ago. The white-haired man smiled warmly at Sarah. "I knew your father when he was just a teenager," he said, his voice gentle but clear. "He used to spend hours in the Met, studying the old masters. I caught him one day, trying to figure out how Rembrandt created his special effects with light." Sarah's mother gasped softly. This was a part of Carlos's life she'd never heard about either. Instead of throwing him out, Arthur continued, I offered him a job as my assistant. He was the most talented young artist I'd ever seen. But more than that, he had a theory that the old masters had secrets in their paint, ways of hiding images that only appeared in certain light. He pulled out an old photograph. It showed a teenage Carlos in the museum's restoration lab, surrounded by ancient paintings and technical equipment. He spent 2 years helping me restore paintings, Arthur said, and in his spare time, he worked on his theory. When he finally created his special paint, I urged him to publish his findings. But Carlos, the old man's eyes grew misty. Carlos said some discoveries weren't meant for fame. They were meant to be gifts for the people you love. Sarah's heart pounded as Arthur reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Your father left this with me 30 years ago, he said, handing it to Sarah. Made me promise to find you if anything ever happened to him. Took me a while. I'm retired now, living in Florida. But when I saw the news about your father's painting technique being discovered, he smiled. I knew it was time. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in her father's familiar hand and a small, ancient-looking key. My dearest Sarah, she read aloud, her voice shaking. If you're reading this, you've already discovered the secret of the memory paint. But there's something else you need to know. While working at the Met, I discovered that Rembrandt really did have a secret technique for hiding images in his paintings. The proof is in my old research journals, locked away in a safety deposit box. The key is enclosed. Sarah looked up at Arthur, who nodded encouragingly. But the real treasure, she continued reading, isn't the technique. It's the truth I learned while searching for it. That art isn't about the secrets we keep, but the stories we share. I hid my discoveries not out of fear or selfishness, but because I knew someday you would find them when you were ready. When you had discovered your own voice as an artist. The safety deposit box, Arthur said softly, is still there. I've kept the account active all these years. Inside, you'll find everything. Your father's research on Rembrandt's technique, his early experiments with memory paint, and he paused significantly. His will. His will? Sarah's mother whispered. But we read his will after he passed. That was his regular will, Arthur explained. But in that box is his artistic will, his patents, his formulas, his discoveries about art history. He left everything to Sarah, with instructions that it should only be revealed when she found her own path in art. Sarah thought about all her drawings, the ones she'd done to earn money on the streets, the ones she'd made to help other students, the ones she'd created simply to keep hope alive during the darkest times. He would be so proud of you, Stallone said quietly. You didn't just inherit his talent, you inherited his heart. Sarah looked around the youth center, at her father's painting with its hidden layers of love and memory, at her mother's bright smile, at the room full of young artists already working at the new easels and drawing tables. Then she looked down at her father's final letter, reading the last lines through tears of joy. Sarah, mi amor, by now you know that every painting tells many stories, depending on how you look at it. Your story is just beginning. Take these discoveries and make them your own. Share them with the world in your own way, in your own time. And remember, the greatest masterpiece isn't hanging on any wall. It's the love we share, the hope we give others, and the beauty we find in everyday moments. All my love, forever and always, Dad. Sarah clutched the key to her heart, feeling the weight of her father's legacy. Not as a burden, but as a gift. She thought about all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. A desperate drawing on Hollywood Boulevard, a chance encounter with Sylvester Stallone, the rediscovery of her father's paintings, and now, this final revelation. Looking up at her father's masterpiece, with its layers of hidden images revealing themselves in the shifting light, Sarah knew what she wanted to do next. She would use her father's techniques not just to make art, but to help others tell their stories. Starting right here, in this youth center, she would teach other young artists to find the magic in ordinary moments, to see beauty from every angle. After all, that was her father's greatest lesson, that art, like love, only grows stronger when you share it with others. And so, surrounded by family, both old and new, Sarah Martinez stepped into her future, carrying her father's dreams and her own, ready to paint her own masterpiece, one filled with light, love, and endless possibilities. Thank you for experiencing Sarah's incredible journey with us. We'd love to know which part of this story touched your heart the most, and where are you listening from? Drop your location in the comments below. It's amazing to see how stories like Sarah's connect us across the world. If you enjoyed this tale of hope, talent, and unexpected friendship, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're looking for more inspiring stories, click the video appearing on your screen right now. Remember, sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest acts of courage. See you in the next story.